Rips it. Scores in overtime. Checked by Bedard. He's got a breakaway. Scores! What a goal by Connor Bedard!
Absolute cinema. Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes, back to the channel. The Chicago Blackhawks are a storied Original Six franchise that has been around for a long time. Established in the 1926-27 season, the franchise celebrated its 100th year, its centennial season this past year. Of course, there have been a lot of very good players that have played for this organization throughout the years. 6 Stanley Cup victories, a lot of highs and lows in that period. So I thought I'd come together today and attempt to rank the greatest Blackhawks in history, determine who the greatest Blackhawk of all time is. So that's what I'm doing today. I thought about doing a top 100 Blackhawks of all time vid in honor of the 100th season, but I'm like, no, that would be way too much. So I thought top 25, I cut it off there. Looking at, the rankings and everything, I think the top 25 is a pretty good number, I think, to cut it off at for this list. In terms of determining these rankings, there are 5 main factors that come into play here. Number 1 is Blackhawks legacy, what type of impact they had on the Blackhawks, mostly on the ice, but, a little bit of off ice as well, right? We're just talking about players today, but I think just the overall impact on the organization that said player had is very important. Number 2, only what they did the Blackhawks matters. We're not looking at their entire NHL careers, only, their Blackhawks stints, because a lot of these players in the list have played for multiple NHL teams. We're just looking at what they did the Blackhawks. That's all that matters. So, number 3, I'd say awards bump up the rating, right? Awards is most, I'd say that's a pretty important factor. There might be a player that has better stats than another player, but if that other player, won a Stanley Cup, won some sort of major award, that's gonna, bump up their likely slot in the rankings. So that matters. Number 4, I'm not gonna lie, there is some bias at these rankings. Like there is a bit of a bias on my front. I'm 23 years old, so obviously, like the players that I've watched are gonna get a little bit of preference here, particularly the core players from those 2010s Blackhawks. Like those guys will probably be rated higher on my end than of course, those of you who watch, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. I did my best to be fair to all, eras. I tried to be fair to the historic players as well, from the players that maybe not many people have watched, of course, from the Blackhawks' original heydays. So I tried to be fair towards all eras. Of course, it's very hard to compare eras. 100-year history, there's been a lot of hockey that's been played, and the hockey that's being played in 2026 looks a lot different than the hockey that was played in 1976, which looks a lot different than the hockey that was played in 1926. So very hard to compare eras, of course. Obviously, today's players are, in terms of talent, are more skilled, but also you could argue, in many ways, the previous eras you could say were harder because there's a much more physical, tough game. So you can't really compare eras, but I did my best, to look at, the entire history here and, come to terms of a pretty fair ranking here. Of course, this is just my opinion too. So everyone watching this will have a different opinion, but these are my opinions. So anyway, starting off, we'll do a few honorable mentions first, top 25. So obviously there's going to be a lot of very good players that are left off this list. So I thought I'd go through some of my main honorable mentions before I get to the top 25. Number 1, I really wanted to have this guy in here. I feel like he should be in here, but I just couldn't quite get him in there. Keith Magnuson, he's my number 1 honorable mention. Of course, his number is retired by the organization as well. Very tough, bruising defenseman back in the day. I know my grandma, he was one of my grandma's favorite players in the 70s. So very tough player, definitely a fan favorite amongst the Blackhawks. I believe he won a Bill Masterton trophy as well. So I believe so. No, very, very, definitely a fan favorite player from his era. Very tough player, very physical player. Definitely a player you wouldn't want to mess with for sure. So yeah, he's one of my first honorable mentions. Dennis Hall is my second honorable mention. Of course, Dennis Hall, the brother of Bobby Hall, unfortunately passed away this past year. But Dennis Hall, easy to kind of forget about him because, of course, he was overshadowed by his brother Bobby, who's one of the greatest Blackhawks in history. We'll get to him later in this list, but I do think Dennis Hall had a very good career at the Blackhawks as well. He had a 40-goal season there. Maybe wasn't a star player like his brother Bobby was, but still a very good player for his era, particularly the 60s, 70s. So wanted to include him as an honorable mention. Number three, Al Secord. Really wanted to have him in there. He was my mom's favorite player back in the day. My mom liked Stan Mikita, and Al Secord was also, among her favorite players. So I wanted to include Secord, of course, another very tough player, but also could score. Definitely that power forward type player. He could score too, 40 goal scorer, could produce around a point per game, but couldn't quite make room for him in this list. And then the last one is Bob Murray, defenseman, played many years for the Blackhawks, amongst the most games played by defensemen in Blackhawks history. Another guy just narrowly missed out on the list, played 70s, 80s era, so just narrowly missed out. Of course, he became NHL executive after his playing days, particularly with the Ducks. So yeah, those are my album mentions. Anyway, getting into the main list here, starting off, number 25 is Chuck Charlie Gardner, goaltender in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He played for the Blackhawks during its heydays, right? During its original days, in the 1920s, 1930s. Gardner was one of their first goaltenders, and he was fantastic. He was a part of the 1934 Blackhawks Stanley Cup team, of course, the first Stanley Cup in their franchise history. Gardner was a big reason why the team won the cup that year. He's one of the best goalies from his era, so I thought he deserved a spot in the list. As you'll see in this list, the Blackhawks have a lot of goaltenders in this list. Blackhawks have usually had a pretty good history when it comes to having elite goaltenders in net. So Gardner is number one on the list, and I'm also one of the original Blackhawks from their inaugural days. Number 24 is Pitt Martin. Martin had a very good career at the Blackhawks, particularly the 70s, 80s. His legacy is kind of hurt, though, because, he was a part of the Phil Esposito trade. The Blackhawks did trade Phil Esposito to the Boston Bruins late 60s, early 70s, which, that turned out to be a pretty bad trade because Esposito went on to become one of the greatest players of all time, 700-plus goals, 1,500 points plus with the Boston Bruins, multi-time champion, one of the best players from his era, of course, was very good at, kind of be able to accumulate those garbage goals net front, very smart player, high hockey IQ. Of course, the brother of Blackhawks goalie Tony Esposito, who we'll get to later. That trade didn't work out. Like, no disrespect to Pitt Martin, he was a fine player. He could produce around 60, 70 points, but yeah, he didn't have a Hall of Fame career like Phil Esposito did. So the trade itself was bad, but like Pitt Martin was fine. Like, he was good for the Blackhawks, had a nice career. It's a shame his legacy kind of gets impacted by the fact that the other end of his trade was Phil Esposito. Like, it's really hard to live up to that. Kind of similar to 2017, the Panarin Saad trade. No disrespect to Brandon Saad. It's kind of a shame that Saad's legacy gets hurt by the fact that Panarin went the other way. It's a very similar type of situation. Like, Pitt Martin was a good player for the Blackhawks, but he wasn't great like Esposito was for the Bruins. So, but still, I thought he deserved to be on this list at number 24. Next up is Nicholas Hjalmarsson, number 23. Some of you may argue this is a bit high, but I think Hjalmarsson deserves to be in the top 25, because the stats don't tell the story of Nicholas Hjalmarsson. I think one of the best defensive defensemen from his era, pitcher behind me there, number 4. Blackhawks had a few very good defensemen, we're 4. But yeah, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, one of the best defensemen in terms of defense that we've seen, right? Very few players could block shots at the rate he did. Very physical player as well. Had a nice slap shot, didn't use it a lot. Like, he didn't get a lot of points, but that wasn't his game. Hjalmarsson was known to be a defensive stalwart. Definitely a guy the Blackhawks relied upon a lot come playoff time. He was a member, of course, of that core. Won 3 Stanley Cups in 2010 and 2015. I think, I'd say at the time he was underrated. I don't think he's underrated anymore. Like, I think Blackhawks fans now understand how important Hjalmarsson was to those Blackhawks teams. I don't really consider him underrated anymore. I think he's properly rated. I think he's gotten the respect he deserves, at this stage. But no, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, of course, very good player for his era. Definitely a player that you can't just look at the stat sheet for, because he provides so much more to the game beyond that with his block shots, with his hitting, his physical play, and just overall smart play in his own end. Definitely a guy I could always rely upon. So yeah, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, number 23. Number 22 is Doug Bentley, another historic player here. Played, what hurts Bentley is the fact he played for the Blackhawks when they sucked. Like, he was a part of the 40s, 50s Blackhawks that were really bad. Didn't win any cups in those eras, and just the original 6 era in general, wasn't very good for the Blackhawks, particularly the 1940s and 50s. Like, they struggled a lot. Didn't make the playoffs very often. Usually were towards the bottom of the original 6. But Bentley was a very good player for them, star player. 531 points in 544 games. He's a Hockey Hall of Famer. Of course, his brother Max Bentley also played the Blackhawks, another Hall of Famer. He didn't quite make the running here, but he's of course a Blackhawks legend too. But yeah, Doug Bentley, one of the best players from his era. So I thought he deserved to be in this list. Many of you watch, you might not know who he is. I don't know how many people watching this would have been alive to watch Doug Bentley, but no, very good player for his era, Hockey Hall of Famer. So I thought he deserved to be in here. Number 21 is the late great Troy Murray. Like not Bobby, like Dennis Hall. Unfortunately passed away this past year. But Troy Murray, beloved figure of the Blackhawks organization, both on and off the ice. Of course, he was great during his playing days. Very good during his playing days, actually. 80s, 90s. In many ways, he was, the Jonathan Toews of his era. I'm not just saying that because he wore number 19, but Troy Murray was a very good two-way forward, two-way center. Could play well on both ends. He won a Selke Trophy for best defensive forward in the NHL, but he could also score too. He had a 40-goal season there. He had a 90-point year, nearly a 100-point year. Troy Murray is a very good player for his era. Very responsible on both ends, very dependable player. Of course, you could always rely on in all situations as well. Of course, Troy Murray's well beyond his Blackhawks playing days. Of course, became a radio announcer for the Blackhawks as well. He also spent a year in the booth as well on TV, but mostly known for his radio gigs. Also, Blackhawks ambassador as well. Definitely one of those guys that, beloved figure in the Chicago community. I mean, pretty much nobody has anything bad to say about Troy Murray. Definitely one of the most respected people, in the game, within the Blackhawks organization and their history. Definitely missed for sure, gone too soon. But no, Troy Murray, I think 21, fair spot for him for sure. Blackhawks legend. Number 20 is Tony Amani, breaking into the top 20 here. Tony Amani, again, I think Amani's another one of those players who's hurt by the era he played in. He kind of played for the Blackhawks during a tough time. Late 90s, early 2000s, of course, were a rough time for the Blackhawks. He kind of joined the team right as that 90s team was kind of starting to decline. A few of those players are traded that we'll get to later. So Tony Amani kind of joined the team, at a tough time. And yeah, the Blackhawks teams he played for weren't very good. He was definitely one of the better players, probably the best player on the teams he played for. Very consistent power forward. You could get 30, 40 goals, 60, 70 points. Also very good on the international stage as well. I believe he had the winning goal in the 1996 World Cup of Hockey for Team USA when they beat Team Canada. I believe it was him that had it. Played a lot with, JR, Jeremy Roenick. So, American legend, USA hockey legend, Blackhawks legend, number 10 as well. So paved the way for Patrick Sharp there. Definitely one of the few memorable Blackhawks, from his time, because unfortunately, the time he played for the Blackhawks is very much a dark period, but he was definitely a player that was worth watching on Blackhawks teams that weren't really any good. So yeah, number 20, Tony Amani. Number 19 is Corey Crawford. Again, some may say this a bit high, but I don't think Crawford gets the respect he deserves. I think, it's starting to come around now. I think after his playing career, I think he's starting to get that. But while Crawford was playing, he wasn't always a goaltender that got that due respect. Of course, two-time Stanley Cup champion, 2013, 2015. He wasn't on that 2010 team. He was within the organization, but he didn't play during the playoffs, maybe one or two regular season games. But yeah, Corey Crawford, of course, became Blackhawks starter in the 10-11 season after their 2010 Cup win, and was their starter throughout the 2010s decade. His career ended in 2020. But yeah, no, Crawford, very reliable in net. Definitely a bit of an unorthodox goaltender in terms of his, just in terms of the way he played, his positioning. His very unique goaltender. But no, Crawford, of course, just very reliable, right? Could always count a big stop for him, right? Very agile on the crease. And definitely a goaltender as well that I think when he went down with an injury in the 17-18 season, the Blackhawks dropped off, missed the playoffs that year. I think that's when fans finally realized how crucial Crawford was to those Blackhawks teams. Many people say that he was overrated based off of the defense in front of him, based off of Keith Seabrook, John Morrison, Oduya, all the, loaded defense he had in front of him, the loaded team he had in front of him. But no, Crawford's stats, you look at Crawford's stats, man, like his goals against average, save percentage, like they're right up there at the best from his era. Pretty similar to the likes of, Henrik Lundqvist, Carey Price, Pekka Rinne. Crawford, in many ways, I think was one of the best goaltenders from the 2010s, but you don't often hear him in those conversations. I think, many people see him as a good goaltender, but not a great goaltender. But no, I think Crawford was great. I think he's one of the best goalies in Blackhawks history. I still say he's number 4. Like for me, I'd still say there are 3 goalies for me that stand out as better than Crawford. That's why he's number 19 here. I think there are a few goalies we'll get to later that I just have to have ahead of him. But no, I think Crawford is deserving of a top 20 spot. Definitely a Blackhawks legend. Fucking right, Chicago. Cup parade moment will always be legendary. So definitely Crawford, very entertaining netminder. And I think number 19, I think is right for him. Number 18 is Bill Mosienko. Of course, Bill Mosienko, another, 1940s, 50s Blackhawks. So he played for the team, sort of that Doug Bentley era when the team wasn't very good. Didn't win any cups. But no, Mosienko is definitely one of the better Blackhawks from the original 6 era from 1942, 1967. Of course, he's most well known for his hat trick in 21 seconds. Mosienko scored 3 goals in 21 seconds. No player has, come close to that NHL history. Of course, the fastest hat trick in NHL history. I don't think that record is ever going to get broken in today's today's NHL. I don't think you're ever going to see that broken, so it's just pretty unthinkable. So, yeah, Mosieko, another Hockey Hall of Famer as well, another Hockey Hall of Famer. Definitely one of the legends of the game from his era. So, yeah, I think 18 is about right for him. Number 17 is Doug Wilson, defenseman Doug Wilson. Definitely an offensive defenseman from the 70s, 80s era, particularly 80s, early 90s as well. Perfected the snapshot. Like Doug Wilson didn't have much of a slap shot, but he kind of perfected the snapshot. Kind of a hybrid of a wrister and a slapper. Definitely a very offensive-oriented defenseman. He was all right defensively, but definitely more known for his offensive game. I believe he had a career-high 39-goal season, which as a defenseman's pretty crazy. So he could produce around a point-per-game rate, definitely. But yeah, very dependable for his era. Another fan favorite as well. Doug Wilson, of course, became an executive later on for the Sharks as well. So, definitely someone, a lot of hockey players, after their playing careers, they stay involved, whether coaching, managerial roles, etc. And, Wilson, another one of those players. But yeah, you look at, defensive history, Doug Wilson actually leads the way in terms of production. There's no defenseman in Blackhawks history that has more points than Doug Wilson, which I don't think many people would guess that. I think there are a few other defensemen we would assume, would be number one, but no, it's actually Doug Wilson. So, but still, I couldn't have him number one amongst Hawks D-man. For me, there are a few defensemen in Hawks history that I would put ahead of him. So that's why 17. Number 16 is Sharpie. Patrick Sharp, another 2010s Blackhawks core member, 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Patrick Sharp. Of course, on a team that featured the likes of Kane Tays, Keith Seabrook, Sharp could be someone that maybe could be a bit, overlooked, if you will. But no, Patrick Sharp, very dependable, sniper, 30, 40 goal scorer. They didn't call him a sharpshooter for nothing. Had very good chemistry at the likes of Tays, Kane, Hossa. Always very consistent as well, Sharp. Like you could always get, 60, 70 points. You could play him anywhere, first, second line, third line, mostly winger, but could play center as well. Sharp, very dependable player from that era. Maybe not that star player like those players I mentioned were, but no, Sharp was just a very solid, very good player, probably the fourth best forward on those teams in terms of, the forward core. So, but no, Patrick Sharp, again, the other Blackhawks legend whose name starts with Patrick, maybe not the one that, we talk about the most, but no, Sharpie definitely. Another Blackhawks legend. Was sad to see him go in 2015. He never felt right with Dallas. He always looked wrong in the Dallas Stars gear. It never seemed right. Also, my mom's favorite favorite player from that Blackhawks core team. So I thought I'd mention that as well. Not only one of the best Blackhawks players in terms of his on ice production, but also like one of the best looking Blackhawks off the ice as well. I think we could all agree with Sharpie there. So yeah, Patrick Sharp, number 16, right behind me there. Yeah. Number 15 is Brent Seabrook, another Blackhawks core member, 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Brent Seabrook, the perfect defensive partner to Duncan Keith. Great defensive defenseman, could also produce offensively as well. Normally good for 30, 40 points. Very clutch as well. Like Brent Seabrook had quite a few overtime goals in the playoffs postseason. Very clutch defensive performer. Could play over 20 minutes a game, all situations. Penalty kill, power play, even strength, everything. Brent Seabrook, very dependable. Was always good for blocking shots. Could always provide that physicality of his hitting. Very smart defensive player in terms of his positioning as well. And just the perfect complement to Duncan Keith, right? Keith and Seabrook were, an elite defensive pairing. And I think, a big reason why Duncan Keith had the success he had is because he had Brent Seabrook alongside him, right? Brent Seabrook is always very reliable. Also spent his entire career at the Blackhawks as well for Brent Seabrook. Just as Crawford had as well. Brent Seabrook played every single game of his career with the Blackhawks. Career ended in 2020, same as Crawford. So, but yeah, Brent Seabrook, definitely a Blackhawks legend. I want to see his number 7 go up to the Raptors as well. There is already a 7 up there in the Raptors. Hopefully we see Brent Seabrook join him there. We'll get to the other 7 later, right? But yeah, Brent Seabrook, number 15. Number 14 is JR, Jeremy Roenick. Definitely one of the most entertaining Blackhawks in history. I've read his books. The dude is an absolute comedian. JR, both great on and off the ice, right? 1990s, multi-time 50-goal scorer, multi-time 100-point producer. Definitely one of the more entertaining Blackhawks in history, JR. Sniper as well, smaller forward. And it was hard in that era. It was hard in the 90s era to succeed as a smaller forward, but JR made it work. Definitely played bigger than he was because he could also, he's also a very physical, tough player as well. But no, more known for his skill. Definitely, you look at JR. Basically, if Patrick Kane was a power forward in the 1990s, that was Jeremy Roenick. Like, that's who he was. Definitely a guy who was known for his mouth as well. Like a lot of good one-liners and quotes from JR. Of course, he's still involved in the game as well. Like he's been involved in the game, as an analyst, as a reporter today as well. So, but yeah, no, JR, very entertaining. Of course, unfortunately, one of those many 90s legends, unfortunately, that was traded. He was traded to the Coyotes. Unfortunately, didn't spend his entire career at the Blackhawks, which is a shame. But no, definitely another USA hockey legend. I was happy to see him finally get inducted to the Hall last year. Definitely very deserving for Jeremy Roenick. So it's definitely long awaited, but it was good to see him finally get the nod there and get the recognition that he deserved there. So very nice to see that. And number 13 is Ed Belfour, third goaltender on the list, and I think the third best goalie in Blackhawks history. 1990s legend there, multi-time Vezina Trophy winner, is a top goaltender in the game of hockey. Ed Belfour is very legendary 90s goaltender. Another guy like Roenick, another 90s Blackhawk that didn't spend his entire career at the Blackhawks. He did get traded, dealt later in his career, but no, Belfour definitely another entertaining Blackhawk as well. A lot of these 90s Blackhawks there are a lot of characters in those 90s teams, and Belfour is definitely among those characters. So it's funny, Blackhawks definitely faced a conundrum in the 90s because they had a tandem in 1992 that consisted of Ed Belfour, and their backup goaltender was Dominic Hasek. So Ed Belfour was so good because at this stage, like, he was the top goaltender in hockey. He was a Vezina winner. So the Blackhawks thought, well, if we already have Ed Belfour, we don't need Dominic Hasek. So they go on to trade Hasek. And well, that I guess turned out to be a mistake because Hasek turned into arguably the best goaltender of all time. Definitely, top 5 in terms of NHL history. And now Belfour had a great career, Hall of Fame career, but, not quite the same level as Hasek. So, but yeah, Blackhawks at one point did have 2 Hall of Famers as their goaltending duo, but of course they didn't know at the time, of course. But yeah, no, Belfour, another Hawks legend. Unfortunately, like Roenick, did miss out on a cup. It did make it to the Cup Finals in 1992, but lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins that year, led by Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr. But no, Belfour, I think 13 works for him. Number 12 is Chris Chelios, not just a Blackhawks legend, but a Chicago legend in general. Of course, the hometown Chicago, Illinois boy. Started his career with the Montreal Canadiens. He is traded to the Blackhawks, as the 90s, kind of on the onset of the 90s there, which that wasn't a popular trade at first because it sent Dennis Savard the other way, of course, to Montreal. So a bit of a swapping of hometown players there. But yeah, of course, Dennis Savard was a Blackhawks legend, fan favorite. So, it was a trade that Blackhawks fans loved at first, but I think they grew on it pretty quickly. Of course, Chris Chelios went on to become one of the best defensemen in Blackhawks history. Multi-time Norris Trophy winner, is the best defenseman in the game of hockey. Legendary Blackhawks defenseman, very physical Blackhawks defenseman, can provide a big hit, provide a big shot block. Definitely a player that is very tough to play against. And of course, after his Blackhawks career, he's traded to the Red Wings. Another Blackhawks legend from the 90s that was traded, later on in the decade. Of course, he's dealt to the Red Wings. Not the only Blackhawks legend that also played for the Red Wings that we'll get to in this list, but yeah, Chelios, of course, played for a long time until 2010, the Thrashers and Chicago Wolves. Of course, he's been very involved with the Blackhawks beyond his playing days. He's been an ambassador for the team later on in his career. Of course, he's always very active in the city of Chicago. Of course, 2024, he had his number 7 retired in the UC rafters. Hockey Hall of Famer as well. Legend in the game of hockey. And of course, the man who ultimately kind of broke Patrick Kane's return to Chicago this past year. It was Chris Chelios' report a month ago that, Kane was between Chicago and Buffalo. And of course, we know how that went down. So yeah, Chelios, I guess, unofficially broke the Patrick Kane re-signing there. So, but yeah, Chris Chelios, definitely a Blackhawks legend. Wanted to have him in the top 10. I couldn't quite have him in the top 10. I want him there, but just for me, there are 10 guys for me that stand out. But yeah, Chris Chelios, number 12. Number 11 is Pierre Pilote, another Blackhawks defenseman, another, sort of, 50s, 60s legend. He was a part of the 1961 Stanley Cup champion team. Of course, the last Blackhawks Stanley Cup champion of the original 6 era, of that original era, the third cup in their franchise history after 1934 and 1938. Hawks wouldn't win another cup until, 49 years later, of course, in the 2010 core led by Patrick Kane. But no, Pierre Pilote, one of the most, decorated defensemen in Blackhawks history. 3-time Norris Trophy winner. I believe he won all 3 of those in consecutive seasons. 3 Norris Trophies for Pierre Pilote. So that's what gives me the edge there. I guess you could say maybe Chelios could be ahead of him, but I mean, 3 Norris Trophies in a row, like, it's hard to deny that. So, Pilote, definitely one of the best players from his era, one of the best defensemen in the game of hockey scene. So for me, I think 11 on the list, is pretty fair for him, but just outside the top 10. And now we're getting into the heavy hitters, the top 10 best Blackhawks in history. For me, it's gotta be these 10. Number 10 is Hoss the Boss, Marian Hossa, number 81, arguably the best power forward in Blackhawks history. He was the last piece. He was the last missing piece of the puzzle for that 2010s Blackhawks core. Blackhawks don't win 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years without Marian Hossa. Of course, he had his number 81 retired in the 2022-2023 season. Hockey Hall of Famer, one of the legends of the game of hockey is Marian Hossa. Unfortunately, another guy who had his career prematurely cut short there, unfortunately, which was a shame to see. But no, Hossa, definitely one of the best players that this game has seen. So for me, I think he's deserving the top 10. Some would say maybe this is a bit high. I don't think it's high for Hossa. I don't think top 10 is high for Hossa at all. I think he's very deserving of it. One of the most important players of that Blackhawks team. Also, my dad's favorite player as well. Number 81, Hossa was his favorite player of all time. So, but yeah, I think top 10, Hossa deserves to be in there for me. So, just cracks top 10 for Hoss. Also, like one of those players, well, is just so respected. Like in terms of that Blackhawks team, many people say that Marian Hossa was, the most respected, nicest guy in those teams. So I think he deserves another extra nod for that. Also read his book, very good books. I recommend reading it. Yeah, another good book. A lot of these guys have good books. Recommend reading them. Yeah. Number 9 is Steve Larmer. Definitely a guy that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Definitely very underrated. It's number 28. Actually hasn't been retired yet. He's also not in the Hockey Hall of Fame, which is shocking. But Steve Larmer, nearly 1,000-point producer. In terms of the Blackhawks, look at their all-time stats. He's up there, man. He's actually, I believe, top 5. He is. Number 5, 406 goals, 517 assists, 923 points in 891 games for Steve Larmer. So, I think top 10 is a very deserving spot for him. Another, 80s, 90s Blackhawks legend, power forward. Played most of his career at the Blackhawks, also played at the Rangers, won a Stanley Cup with the Rangers in 1994. But no, Steve Larmer, definitely one of the best Hawks in history. Definitely a guy doesn't always seem to get his due, but is always over a point per game plus player. Can kind of do it all. Very tough player as well. Very versatile player as well. So I think, 9th is pretty fair for Steve Larmer. I'd like to see his number get retired one day. I think he's very deserving of it. Number 8 is Glenn Hall. The second Blackhawks goalie here. The fourth one, but number 2 on the list. There's one more we'll get to later, I think, is ahead of Hall. But no, Glenn Hall, Mr. Goalie, 502 consecutive starts for Glenn Hall. If there's one record that will never be broken, like that's probably the one that's most likely. I don't think you're never going to see another player play 502 consecutive games. Like that's ridiculous, man. Legend has he'd always throw up before every single game to get the nerves out of his system. Definitely one of the best goalies from his era. I mean, his nickname is literally Mr. Goalie, so that should tell you literally everything you have to know. Remember the 1961 Stanley Cup champion Blackhawks as well with Pierre Palat, with Stan Mikita, Bobby Hull we'll get to later. But yeah, Glenn Hall, number 2 for me in terms of Blackhawks goalies. There's one more that to rank ahead of him. Didn't quite play his full career at the Blackhawks. Of course, he did play at the Blues later in his career, made it to multiple Stanley Cup finals with them, but never won it with the Blues. But no, Blackhawks legend Glenn Hall, it definitely has to be, I think a spot. I think it's a pretty fair spot for him for sure. Number 7, and the best Blackhawks goalie in history has to be Tony Esposito. It has to be Tony O. How can it not be? You look at the all-time wins, you look at the games played, shutouts, pretty much every goaltender stat. Tony Esposito leads pretty much all of them. It's absolute crime. He never won a Stanley Cup here. He played on a lot of very good Blackhawks teams in the 70s, 80s, made it to multiple Cup finals. Unfortunately, his Blackhawks teams never won the Stanley Cup, but 15 shutouts in his rookie year. 15 in his rookie year. His Calder season. You'll never see that again. One of the best goaltenders that the game of hockey has ever seen. Absolutely he is. Tony Esposito, Blackhawks legend. Absolutely he is. Another guy later in his career became a Blackhawks ambassador, a Hockey Hall of Famer. Of course, number in the UC Raptors as well, number 35. So, yeah, Tony Esposito, I think, just misses out in the top 5. Definitely a guy you want to have in there, but just, there's just so many legendary players here. You can't make room for all of them. So, for me, Esposito just nearly misses out in the top 5. Definitely could make a case for him, though, for sure. Number 6 is Dunks. Duncan Keith, for me, is the greatest defenseman in Blackhawks history. Absolutely, he is 3-time Stanley Cup champion, a part of that Blackhawks core. Played 25, 30 minutes a game, 2-time Norris Trophy winner in 2010, 2014, a member of NHL's top 100 greatest players list, multi-time, Olympian with Team Canada. Duncan Keith, 2015 Conn Smythe winner as well for playoff MVP. Arguably the most impressive playoff run we saw from any Blackhawk, from that 2010s era. Duncan Keith, man, just so reliable, could do everything, great on both ends, very graceful skater, had to slap it from the point, had great vision there, could quarterback a power play, could walk a blue line, just one of the best defensemen from his era, arguably the best defenseman from his era, one of the best defensemen the game of hockey's ever seen. Of course, inducted in the Hall of Fame last year. It was great to see that, great to see Dunks get inducted in the Hall of Fame last year, great speech there as well, so very deserving for number 2. Of course, we should see number 2 in the UC Raptors very soon. In fact, I think he's eligible now, so Can we get Keith in the UC Raptors this year? Can we make that happen? I'm pretty sure he's eligible. He's been retired for 3 years now, over 3 years. Spent his last career at the last year, in his career with the Oilers. But otherwise, his entire career for the most part, bar 1 year, has played at the Blackhawks. So you love to see that last year in 2021. So, but yeah, Duncan Keith, I really want to have him in the top five. I hate that I can't have him in the top five, but just for me, there are five guys here that I think it has to be. Like for me, there's really no argument that for these five guys. So yeah, I think Keith just misses out on the top five. He comes in at 6. Number 5 is Savoir Faire, Savvy, Dennis Savard, the French-Canadian legend. If Patrick Kane played in the 1980s, that is Dennis Savard right there. Of course, the inventor of the spinorama that, of course, we've seen players like Patrick Kane use. Of course, also Blackhawks coach later in his career as well. Of course, he coached Kane Tays, in that core in 2007-08, also 08-09. Then, of course, Joe Quenneville came in after that. But yeah, Savard, before Quenneville came in, was the Blackhawks coach. Another guy's remained a Blackhawks ambassador, of course, still, involved with the organization even today. But yeah, Dennis Savard, of course, 70s, 80s legend. You look at the all-time Blackhawks stats, he's up there. Number 4, 377 goals, 719 assists, 1,096 points in 881 games. He has most of the Blackhawks, points, single-season records. 131 points in a season is the most we've seen in Blackhawks history. Not sure you're ever going to see that broken. I mean, maybe Bedsy could break that one day. I don't know. 131 points, I don't know. That's pretty tough, man. But yeah, Dennis Savard, definitely one of the legends of his era, definitely one of the legends of the game of hockey. I believe his points per game mark, I don't think there's ever been a Blackhawk in history that has a higher points per game than him as well. So another guy, unfortunately, never won a cup. A lot of these legends of this list never won a cup, from those 70s, 80s, 90s eras. Played a lot of very good Blackhawks teams, but they were never quite able to get over the hump. So no cups for him with the Blackhawks. But Dennis Savard, for me, number 5. It almost seems a little bit low, but for me, there are 4 guys on this list that it just has to be. So that's why Savard comes in 5. He deserves to be in the top 5, but for me, the top 4 for me is pretty clear who the top 4 is. So for me, that's why Savard comes in at 5. All right, here we go. The top 4. These are the big ones. I think for me, it's very clear who the top 4 should be. I think the argument then is what order it should be, right? Number 4, I have Jonathan Toews. Jonathan Toews, number 4. I wanted to have him higher. I wanted to have Toews at number 2, but I couldn't justify having him ahead of 3 and 2. So Toews comes at number 4, which I think is a pretty fair spot for him. Jonathan Toews, 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Best captain the Blackhawks has seen, from a leadership perspective. There hasn't been a greater captain in Blackhawks history than Jonathan Toews. Of course, the heartbeat, the leader of those Blackhawks teams. One of the best Blackhawks in history, one of the best players from his era, best two-way players from his era. 2010 Conn Smythe winner, 2013 Selke Award winner, 2015 Mark Messier leader in terms of best captain in the NHL, multi-time Olympian with Team Canada. Jonathan Toews has won everything there is to win, a member of the NHL's top 100 greatest players list, future Hall of Famer. Of course, he retired this past year. Of course, Jonathan Toews came back to the game of hockey this past year, played 1 year in his career with the Winnipeg Jets. Otherwise, his entire career spent with the Blackhawks from 2007 to 2023. Unfortunately for Toews, what holds him back here a bit is the fact in 2020, unfortunately, he has the immune response issues that kind of affects the later portion of his career. I do think Toews had a lot of very good years left in him, like Patrick Kane, but unfortunately, due to his health issues, we'll never know. Unfortunately, Toews came back and wasn't quite the same. Even his last couple years, the Blackhawks wasn't quite the same player. So, which is a shame with Toews. I think he would have gotten over 1,000 points. I think he'd probably be number 2 on this list, but just the last couple of years, they were a bit tough. And so for me, I think, I can't quite rank him ahead of Makita and Hall. But no, I think 4 for me for Toews. I still think, you can make the argument for him for pretty much any spot here. If you want to argue that he's the best Hawk in history, I think you can argue that. But from a stat standpoint, I think there are a few players for me that rank ahead of Toews. But no, Jonathan Toews definitely will be missed from the game of hockey. I think it's pretty crazy to see him retire this year. But no, his number 19 will be in the UC Raptors one day. Of course, it will be with Patrick Kane, of course, future Hall of Famer as well. One of the best players that the game of hockey has seen. Now the top 3. Number 3 for me is Bobby Hull. Bobby Hull, of course, all-time leading goal scorer in Blackhawks history, 601 goals, 604 goals, 549 assists, 1,153 points, and 1,036 games. Of course, played during the 50s, 60s, 70s era, 1961 Stanley Cup champion with Stan Mikita. Of course, he had a 60-goal season with the Blackhawks, a couple of 50-goal seasons in there as well. Of course, perfecter there with Stan Mikita of the banana curve, the banana blade, with the curved stick there. Of course, he was definitely very much a pioneer in the game of hockey as well. Of course, he had that dangerous slap shot as well that some would say could reach a speed as high as 120 miles per hour. How accurate is that? Who knows? Those wooden sticks. But no, Bobby Hull definitely was an absolute G for his era. Definitely no G. I think top three is pretty fair for him. I wouldn't put him ahead of Mikita though, because he didn't spend his entire career at the Blackhawks. Of course, he goes on to play in the WHA, signs the first $1 million contract with the Winnipeg Jets. So he didn't spend his entire career at the Blackhawks like Stan Mikita. So for that reason, I can't have him ahead of Mikita. But yeah, I think number three for Bobby Hall still a fair spot. Number two. Now this is it Makita or is it's Stan Mikita. It's Stan Mikita. If you want to argue one for Makita, you absolutely can make that argument. Absolutely. In terms of the Blackhawks records, Makita has most of them, of course. All-time points leader, right? 541 goals, 926 assists, 1,467 points, and 1,396 games. He has the most seasons, most games, most assists, most points. Makita still has most of the Blackhawks records for now. I say for now because, there's a guy later on this list that could break those records. And if you want to see my video discussing that, whether Showtime could break Makita's records, I released that video this week, so feel free to check that out. I made another historic video earlier this week. But no, Stan Mikita comes in number two for me. I can't quite put him one. 1961 Stanley Cup champion, number 21, retired by the team. My mom's favorite player of all time, right up there. Arguably the best Blackhawk in history. You could definitely make that argument as well, of course. Definitely player as well. Definitely revamped his game a bit. Of course, he's a very tough player early in his career. Eventually became a more gentlemanly player. Won some Lady Byng awards later in his career as well. Won a few Art Ross trophies. Won a few Hart trophies. Definitely one of the best players from his era. Hockey Hall of Famer. One of the best players that this game has seen, of course. I also got a chance to meet him as well. Before he passed away, I got to meet him as a kid, early 2010s. I did a school project on him back at grade school, so I seem to appreciate that. But no, Stan Mikita, definitely a Blackhawks legend. Very deserving, I think. Number two. If you want to argue number one for Mikita, go ahead. But for me, there can only be one. There can only be one. How can it not be number 88, Patrick Kane, Showtime? It has to be Kane. It has to be Kane. It can only be Patrick Timothy Kane. I'm sorry. In fact, if Patrick Kane wasn't already the best Blackhawk in history, I think him coming back to the Blackhawks in 2026 for a second stint has to assert himself as the best Blackhawk of all time, especially if it gets his team back to the playoffs in a second stint over these next 2 years plus. I think there's no argument that Patrick Kane is the greatest Blackhawk of all time. Has to be. 446 goals, 779 assists, 1,225 points, and 1,161 games, and counting. Patrick Kane is the one active Blackhawk on this list who has a chance to keep adding to his records, keep adding to his Blackhawks legacy. 3-time Stanley Cup champion, 2016 Hart, Ted Lindsay, Art Ross winner, 2013 Conn Smythe winner, one of the best that this game has ever seen. Member of the top 100 greatest players list. 2008 Calder Award for Rookie of the Year. U.S. Olympian with Team USA. The greatest American-born hockey player of all time. Leads all U.S.-born players in production, in points. How can it not be Showtime? Number 88, Mr. Aura himself, Patrick Kane. 2010 game-winning goal in the Stanley Cup Finals versus Philly. Patrick Kane put Blackhawks hockey back on the map. He brought respect back to this city, back to this franchise, and he has a chance to once again bring this franchise back from dead for the second time, and I'm not betting against Patrick Timothy Kane III, Showtime Kaner. I will never bet against Kaner. My favorite player of all time, the best Blackhawk of all time, it has to be number 88. Anyway, that is the list. No Connor Bedard. Bedard didn't quite make my top 25 running. One day he'll get there, but too early for Bedsy. If you want to throw him in as an honorable mention, go ahead, but he's not there yet. But yeah, anyway, that's my list of top 25 greatest Blackhawks of all time in their centennial history here. Of course, this next year will be their 100th year. So many good players in their history. There's going to be a lot of good players left out. There's going to be a lot of disagreements. So feel free to comment your thoughts, opinions, players that are maybe too high, too low, players I should have included that I didn't, players that I included that maybe shouldn't have been. Comment all your thoughts below. If you like the video, feel free to like it. Subscribe to the channel for more content. Feel free to hype the video on YouTube. Share it around friends, family. Enjoy the content. All right. That's all I got for this one. Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes out. And I'll see you on the next one, baby. Bye-bye. Absolute cinema, absolute showtime. Boop.